Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we dive into the complex and tragic history of the Sierra Leone Civil War, which raged from 1991 to 2002, a conflict that would leave deep scars on the country, disrupt families, and reshape the future of an entire nation. This war was not just about violence, it was about control. Control of Sierra Leone's resources, power, and people. But how did it all begin? Let's take a closer look at the forces that drove this brutal conflict. Before the war, Sierra Leone had been a relatively stable country in West Africa. Gaining independence from Britain in 1961, Sierra Leone initially experienced hope for its future, but by the 1980s, political instability and corruption took root. The economy was on the decline, with diamond-rich areas providing wealth, but little of it trickled down to the population. In 1985, Joseph Seydou Momo became president after a coup ousted his predecessor, but the APC government was increasingly unpopular. Economic hardship, widespread poverty, and a failure to reform left many people disillusioned with the government. This created fertile ground for rebellion, especially in the east of the country. In the late 1980s, a former soldier, Foday Sanko, with support from neighboring Liberia, founded the Revolutionary United Front, or RUF. Sanko's goal was to overthrow the government, and he presented himself as a champion for the poor, promising to end corruption and fight for the common people. His message resonated, particularly in rural areas where communities felt abandoned by the government. In March 1991, the RUF, with backing from Liberia's Charles Taylor, launched an armed rebellion in Sierra Leone. It began in the eastern region near the border with Liberia, and within months, the RUF's influence spread rapidly. The group was known for its brutal tactics, using terror to dominate villages and intimidate the civilian population. Civilians were forced to join their ranks or face violence. The government, under President Momo, struggled to contain the RUF's advances. Their army was ill-equipped, demoralized, and lacking the training to deal with such a determined insurgency. In 1992, after repeated defeats, the Sierra Leonean military itself staged a coup, ousting President Momo and installing a military junta led by Captain Valentine Strasser. The National Provisional Ruling Council (NPRC), led by Strasser, promised reforms. But the military government's rule was also marked by corruption, mismanagement, and increasing lawlessness. While the NPRC tried to suppress the RUF, their efforts were largely unsuccessful, and the rebellion continued to expand. As the war worsened, Sierra Leone's government sought international help. The United Nations sent peacekeeping forces, and Britain also intervened in 2000 to assist the government. However, the situation was still dire, with rough forces controlling much of the country's diamond-producing areas. Diamonds played a central role in the war. The RUF funded much of their operations through blood diamonds smuggled out of the country and sold on the international market. These diamonds would later become infamous for their association with the conflict, leading to international efforts to regulate the trade through the Kimberley process. Perhaps the most harrowing aspect of the Sierra Leone Civil War was the sheer brutality of the violence. Both the RUF and government forces were accused of committing horrific human rights abuses. Civilians were often caught in the crossfire. The RUF became infamous for their practice of amputating limbs, especially hands and arms, to instill fear and punish perceived enemies. Children were forced into combat as soldiers, turning the war into a nightmare for the country's youngest generation. By 1999, nearly 50,000 people had died and over 2 million were displaced. The international community finally began to respond more decisively. A peace agreement was signed in Lome, Togo, in 1999, which was meant to end the conflict and establish a power-sharing government. But it was fragile, and the war did not end immediately. The war officially ended in January 2002, after the RUF was defeated and the UN and British forces helped to restore peace. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up to address the atrocities, and a special court for Sierra Leone was established to prosecute those responsible for the worst crimes. The country, however, faced a long road to recovery. Today, Sierra Leone is rebuilding, but the scars of the war are still visible. The Civil War not only destroyed lives, but also created a global conversation about conflict diamonds and the importance of human rights. Sierra Leone's Civil War is a story of how power, greed, and international interests can intersect, leading to devastating consequences. But it's also a tale of resilience. The people of Sierra Leone have endured unimaginable hardship, and their journey toward healing continues today.